Welcome to our channel, where real stories unfold with drama, inspiration, and truth revealed. This is the place where justice speaks and where the courageous rise to challenge what's wrong. If you're passionate about hidden truths, acts of bravery, and the incredible strength of ordinary people who dare to stand against injustice, then you've come to the right place. Before we dive into today's powerful story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's begin this gripping journey together. Once thought that after all those years of struggle, sacrificing blood, sweat, and the sleepless nights stolen by gunshots and commands, I had finally found what they call freedom. A 120-acre plot of land in a peaceful valley where the rooster's crow replaced the alarm clock, and the goats wandered around as if they knew this was their own paradise. No boss, no schedules, no orders, except from myself to myself. Every morning, I sat on the wooden porch I built myself, sipping coffee, inhaling the air free from dust and scheming. I thought I had escaped, but I was wrong. One morning, under a cloudless sky, a white plastic sign appeared, zip-tied to the fence like a slash through the still air. Property under evaluation. Please comply with HOA Simmons Valley. I stood frozen, staring at it, as if it had grown from the earth. There was no warning, no procedure. I burned it in the steel drum behind the yard, thinking some kids were playing a prank. But that was my first mistake, underestimating those who think a clipboard in hand can replace the law. 2 days later, a light gray SUV parked in the middle of the driveway, like it was preparing to surround me. A woman stepped out, her khakis pressed perfectly, sunglasses on, and a smile practiced as if she were about to teach a yoga class, not intrude on someone else's land. "Hello, I'm Karen, president of HOA Simmons Valley," she chirped. I just stood there, staring at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. "This is farmland. This is my home." She wasn't smiling because she was happy. She smiled because she knew she wasn't here to welcome me. She was here to start a war. I thought Karen's visit was just a failed intimidation tactic, but it turned out to be only the beginning. 2 days later, new signs appeared, this time laminated full color and mounted higher, even one nailed directly into the goat pen door. Under mandatory inspection, multiple violations pending. I tore each one off and threw them into the fire, as if burning away the audacity. But what I couldn't burn was the feeling that someone was watching me from a distance. Strange angles of the barn, photos taken from the south, where I'd never set up a camera. Someone was secretly documenting every detail on this land, not because they cared about the fence, but because they were mapping out a battlefield. The next morning, 2 men appeared. They wore identical khakis, jackets with HOA patrol patches, holding walkie-talkies and clipboards like part-time patrol officers. They didn't knock, didn't greet me. They just silently walked along the fence as if inspecting a target for eviction. One pointed at my tractor and whispered into the microphone on his jacket. I stepped off the porch, not in a hurry, but not friendly either. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" My voice was low, clear, like the sound of a gun being loaded. The older man, looking like he was trying to remember his lines, replied, "We're conducting a compliance check under HOA regulations." I took a step closer, tilted my head, and asked, "Do you have a badge?" He stammered, "We're operating under the Simmons Valley Charter." I nodded. "Nice. Well then, I invite you to step off my property according to the Callahan Charter, which is the only one that matters here." They backed off, but not because they were convinced, but because I noticed one of them had dropped his clipboard. Inside, it was a map, notes, and names of properties marked with red dots. My farm was marked Alpha High Resistance. I took a photo and called Nate, my friend at the police station. He just sighed. "It's Karen again? She once tried to shut down the feed store for causing rural noise pollution." I understood then. This was no joke anymore. This was a campaign, and I was the first target. I've heard people say, when trouble comes, it knocks on your door. But the kind of trouble Karen sent didn't bother with knocking. It snuck in while the sky was still dark, while the land was still groggy, and the wind hadn't yet picked up enough to stir the gate. I didn't notice it with my eyes, but with my ears. The sound of gravel being crushed underfoot. not as heavy as a wheel, nor as light as an animal. 5 steps, steady rhythm, silent, like special forces. If special forces knew how to use clipboards. I wasn't panicking. I'd seen darker shadows in alleys in Kandahar. Instead of weapons, I held a cold cup of coffee from the night before, quietly stepping to the window near the goat pen. 5 figures, yes, 5, moved in a semicircle, no flashlights, no talking, each wearing an earpiece and a vest labeled HOA enforcement. One of them was holding a clipboard. What can I say? That thing was their talisman. I moved instinctively, not to attack, but to activate the alarm system I'd installed myself. It wasn't anything lethal, but enough to remind them that this land wasn't tame. A simple laser trap ran along the east fence. When one of them stepped in, click. The entire field exploded in light and noise. Spotlights from all 4 corners lit up like a Broadway stage. Sirens blared from the barn to the haystack. 2 men collapsed, one screamed and crawled into the water trough. The other, poor guy, collided with Bella's pen, my largest doe. She wasn't fond of strangers. She rammed him through the fence like a bullet shot from a cannon. I stepped out onto the porch, in my pajamas, coffee in hand, with no rush at all. Early morning, no warning. Were you trying to surprise me? I spoke calmly. The man with the clipboard staggered to his feet, yelling in a trembling voice, "We're acting under HOA Emergency Code 7A. I raised an eyebrow. Did you write that code with a crayon? A moment later, Nate's police car turned onto the dirt path. The red and blue lights flashed like justice arriving late, but still showing up. Nate stepped out of the car, looked around, and then at me. What do you call this? I took a sip of my coffee. SWAT training, backyard version. I thought after the counterattack with light and sirens, Karen would back off, or at least reconsider. But I judged her like a normal person, and that was my next mistake. Karen didn't step back. She pivoted. No more clipboards and bumbling soldiers invading the land. Now she turned to something far more dangerous. Community psychology. Flyers began to appear everywhere, not just stuffed in mailboxes like regular junk mail. Number Karen acted like she was issuing a military draft. The flyers were laminated, printed in black and white, stuck onto plastic stakes, and driven straight into the ground at the entrance to the neighborhood, like a biohazard zone warning. On them was an aerial photo of my farm, probably from a drone. The note underneath was clear, precise. Area B, non-compliant, high risk. It listed illegal livestock, illegal fencing, hostility toward enforcement officers. But the scariest part was the last line. Residents are advised to avoid unauthorized contact. No support, no access. It wasn't just a warning, it was a social sentence. And sadly, it started to take effect. Neighbors who used to wave hello every morning now turned their faces away. The feed store owner quietly raised his prices. The family that came over for a BBQ last year on Independence Day posted in the community group, "We support order. We support community standards." I stood in the middle of the field, staring at a sign reading, "Dangerous goat," nailed to the gate, my heart heavy as stone. This was no longer a conflict between me and Karen. She was building a system, an isolation regime, and I was the first sacrificial lamb. Every slander seemed true when enough people repeated it, and she wasn't just talking, she was preaching. But Karen didn't stop there. The next evening, she held an emergency meeting right at the entrance to her house. No permit, no seating, just a folding table, a microphone, and a scribbled sign. Level 3 meeting, community response. I stood across the street, not hiding, not saying a word. I just observed and realized Karen didn't just have supporters, she had followers. The next morning, I found a laminated card neatly placed in my mailbox. No stamp, no postmark. On it, one bold line read, Tier 3 resident, severe non-compliance. Below it was a list of mandatory actions. Remove all livestock, repaint all barns and sheds in neutral gray, attend a re-education seminar, and submit a written apology to the HOA board. Location, Karen's garage. Title of the seminar, The Silent Fence, When Your Property Speaks. I let out a silent laugh. This wasn't community management anymore. It was a modern-day re-education camp in polo shirts. But the laughter quickly chilled to a shiver when I checked my security system and saw 2 of the perimeter cameras had gone offline, cables cut. The third camera went silent the following night. I didn't need to ask who did it. The only person who knew their locations was Karen. That night, a white sedan with no license plates parked 2 lots down from my home. No one got out. No lights, no sound, just the soft purring of an engine, like a cat stalking a mouse. I used my binoculars. The windows were tinted black, and I couldn't make out the driver. When I approached with a flashlight, the car sped off, leaving deep tire tracks in the dirt. The next morning, Nate traced the temporary registration. It was filed under an organization called Community Horizon Outreach. Director, Karen, a nonprofit front for surveillance operations. Too calculated, too dangerous. And then, the worst happened. Max, my loyal dog of 8 years, a friend I trusted more than many so-called model residents, came home with one leg soaked in blood. I found him trembling behind the ATV, a shard of glass buried deep in his paw. When I checked the goat pen, I found shattered glass spread deliberately near the back gate. Intentional, targeted, and chillingly cold. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just picked Max up, pressed my cheek to his back, and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." Because in that moment, I knew Karen had just crossed the final line, and I was done waiting. I didn't have time to wait for another strike, not after Max bled from the shards of glass someone had scattered in the pen. That night, I turned on my computer, pulled up every video from the remaining cameras, gathered every recording, every piece of paper I'd kept as evidence all this time, every flyer, every sign, every moment Karen and her clipboard army crossed the legal line. I documented it all. Then I stitched it together into a 12-minute video. It opened with blaring floodlights and sirens the first time they breached my fence, and ended with Max whimpering under the dim light near the goat pen. I added one line of text, just 6 words. When the HOA thinks they're the FBI, I hit post. Everything that happened next moved faster than I imagined. The video spread like wildfire in a drought, hundreds of thousands of views in a single day. My inbox was flooded with messages from farmers across the country, saying they'd been through the same thing: fake clipboards, volunteer organizations, absurd warning letters. Karen wasn't an isolated case. She was a pattern. That same night, half of the HOA patrol team announced they were stepping down. The ones who once played Tier 2 officers went silent like they'd never worn labeled vests at all. But Karen, she didn't back down. 2 days later, she knocked on my door. No clipboard, no smile, just a yellow file folder and a voice cold as ice. "You think this is just about goats?" Inside was a set of documents I never expected: emails with federal seals, internal memos, a proposal for a program titled Rural Behavioral Management, Phase 2. I recognized some of the names, people I'd once sat with during my military days, in a unit focused on post-conflict civilian stabilization. They used to talk about soft behavior modulation. I never imagined that the technical report I'd written 12 years ago would become the blueprint for this very nightmare. This wasn't just about a fake HOA. This wasn't just about Karen. This was a real program, with seals, codes, and infrastructure. And I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the test subject. I sat alone in the kitchen, gripping the folder Karen had just left like it might vanish if I loosened my hold. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what lay inside. These weren't just hastily printed pages with coffee stains on the corners. These were real documents, with official titles, government formatting, stamped seals, and words I had once written, heard, and approved. Rural Behavioral Management, Phase 2. A program I had helped build, now operating on the very land I called home. Not a temporary strategy, not a grassroots initiative. This was a full-scale campaign to reshape rural citizens, and bitterly enough, I was the blueprint. Langston arrived within the hour. I didn't need to explain. I simply slid the folder across the table. In the heavy silence, Langston turned each page. Behavior charts, target lists, plans for citizen reintegration. One document stated clearly, subject, Callahan, classification, autonomous, strategic influence, resistant. Then came the part that even made me stop breathing. A personal file. Inside were aerial photos of my home, hand-drawn schematics of my barns and pens, a daily activity schedule, even a recorded conversation between me and Langston on the porch. They weren't just monitoring me. They were studying me, measuring responses, modeling behaviors, tagging habits, like I was a software needing updates. Beside my name were 3 lines of assessment: wakes at 4:50 a.m., feeds animals before 6 a.m., rare visitors, independence level, high, threat level, very high. Langston said only one thing: they're building behavioral profiles, and not just on you. Then he flipped to the next page. 6 more names, 6 residents within a 3-county radius. 1 marked relocated, 1 reintegrated, 1 under resettlement observation. Each person was tagged with a code and a pin color, red, blue, black, corresponding to psychological status. I stood up, eyes fixed on the map at the end of the folder, a web of tiny dots spreading out across the region. This wasn't an HOA. This was a regional social conditioning operation. And I was just the rehearsal for something far bigger. They didn't knock. They didn't leave flyers. No more warnings or reminder letters. This time, they entered as if they already had keys to every gate, as if the land no longer belonged to me. I spotted them at 4:12 a.m. Not with my eyes, but on the infrared camera feed. 3 figures, no lights, no sound, no vehicle. They had been crouching in the woods for nearly 20 minutes before starting to move. Black tactical gear, radios on mute, high boots, clipboards, and 2 real rifles. This wasn't cosplay anymore. I didn't panic. Not this time. I stood up, turned off the monitor, stepped out to the barn, and quietly locked every door, silent as the night itself. Then I returned to the porch and stood still, eyes locked on them as they crossed the fence one last time. The one holding the clipboard stepped forward, voice steady. "We're executing a property seizure under emergency provision B9. Your assets and premises have been classified as high resistance targets." I asked just one question. "Who trained you?" He hesitated. That was all I needed to know. They weren't military and they weren't law enforcement. They were believers, disciples of some doctrine printed from Karen's garage inkjet. I took a step back and pressed the hidden trigger on my watch. Boom! Security gates shot up from the ground, floodlights switched to strobe red, a disorienting light pattern designed to scramble the brain. The rifleman on the right stumbled, raising his weapon. Mistake. 2 non-lethal flashbangs launched from the porch, exploding with concussive sound and pressure, freezing everything for a moment. I didn't wait for them to recover. Rolling off the porch, I activated the phased audio system. Sirens along the fence bounced sound off the barn walls, distorting direction, leaving them disoriented. 1 man collapsed, clutching his rifle. I dove in, blocked his arm, twisted his shoulder back, and drove his face into the cold dirt. Then, like salvation in the darkness, Langston's vehicle pulled in. No sirens, no shouting, just his voice cutting through the chaos. Weapons down. Now. They had numbers. They had power. But what they didn't understand was this. I had been preparing for this long before they even knew my name. They thought it was over when Karen was handcuffed and the police car rolled away, carrying her off the land she once treated like her personal chessboard. They thought every piece of evidence, every file, every accusation had been sealed away neatly in investigative reports. And for a moment, I wanted to believe it too. But then, as Langston and the investigation team collected the last hard drives from the hidden room behind Karen's bookshelf, something appeared on the screen that made everyone in the room fall silent. An encrypted file. Its name was the only thing visible. Reassignment. Pilot Zone. Midwest Beta. No message. No sender. Just coordinates. Not Simmons Valley. Somewhere else. Colder. Flatter. And maybe easier to control. I opened it that night. A familiar logo appeared. OPRM. Office of Rural Population Management. There was no doubt now. This wasn't Karen's pet project. This was part of a large-scale national strategy pilot. And I wasn't the enemy. I was the prototype. What was inside that drive took my breath away. Drone footage. Audio recordings from porch-mounted mics. Even a clip of my own voice. From a phone call over a decade ago, back when I was still in service, drafting reports on post-conflict civilian stabilization strategies. They had used the very blueprint I once helped write to test it on me. Karen wasn't the architect. She was the tool, a pilot officer in a much larger game. And the final image in the drive said it all. 10 individuals in uniform standing beside Karen. Caption above them, Phase 4, Ground Unit Team 7. Which meant there were at least 6 other teams out there. That night, Langston and I stood in silence on the porch. Max lay at my feet, still limping, but eyes locked on the gate. "You think they'll come back?" Langston asked. I didn't hesitate. Not come back, move on. Because once they draw the map, and your name's on it, the war's already begun. I didn't go to the media. I went straight to the one place programs like OPRM fear the most, the Federal Office of Internal Oversight. With a thick folder of documents, video clips, emails, audio recordings, and the full data from the final hard drive, I filed a formal federal whistleblower complaint. I anonymized the names of the affected residents, but not mine, not anymore. I signed with my real name, attached real evidence, and then I hit submit. 3 days later, the information spread. Some news outlets were cautious, calling it a community conflict. But the video I posted, footage of Karen presenting documents stamped with federal seals, of armed enforcement officers, of Max wounded, and especially the final line from the recording, where Karen confessed, "We need people like you to learn how to break them." All of it had gone public. A full-scale investigation was launched. Karen faced new federal charges: unlawful surveillance, impersonating a government official, misappropriation of public resources, conspiracy to defraud, and operating a covert enforcement entity. But the bigger blow came behind closed doors. OPRM was officially dismantled. Strategic advisors for the program were subpoenaed. Some denied involvement. Others chose to cooperate. But I knew. Ideas don't die as easily as programs do. They just evolve. I still live on my land. The fences still stand. The barns are full. And Max still barks whenever a strange car passes. But I'm no longer the same. I'm no longer just a farmer. I became the first whistleblower, the one who exposed an entire campaign disguised under the name of community improvement. I received hundreds of messages, from Colorado, from Montana, from Ohio. All of them said the same thing. We thought we were the only ones. And I answered them, as I always do. If they've marked your name on the map, you're no longer an outsider. Don't wait for someone else to fight for you. And deep down, I know this. Truth can be hidden, but once the light hits it, nothing can stop it from spreading. They called me the whistleblower, the rebellious veteran, the man who wouldn't comply. But the truth is, I'm no hero. I'm just a man who knew when to stand up, when to draw a line, and when to say, enough. The final hard drive, unlabeled except for one name scribbled in black marker, Callahan, held the last answer, and the reason I couldn't stay silent. Inside it, I saw the full scope of the experiment, from Phase 1, community infiltration, to Phase 2, conditioning, Phase 3, pressure application, and finally, Phase 4, behavior modification and erasure. Each phase had targets, timelines, and most of all, my name at the top of the checklist. Then the final video played, Karen staring straight into the camera, speaking like she was teaching a class. If you're watching this, then you figured it out. We didn't choose you because you were easy to control. We chose you because you were stubborn. And we needed to learn how to break people like you. I didn't turn the video off. I just looked out the window, where the fence still stood firm, the goat pen still full of straw, and Max lay at the gate like a guardian, watching over this small patch of land like a god. Langston stopped by that afternoon. He didn't say much. He stood next to me for a moment, then asked, "You gonna open the other drive?" I shook my head. Not yet. Because I don't need to know what else they've got. I just need to know they picked the wrong man. And with all the data I've released, with the investigations now expanding, I know one thing for certain. I'm not fighting alone anymore. Like a wildfire sparked by a single flame, the truth has taken root. And whether Karen is jailed or the program is renamed, relocated, I've already left my mark on their map. A mark they never saw coming. Resistance. The lesson of a clipboard. Freedom doesn't come from silence. It comes from the courage to stand. The story of Callahan is not just a standoff between a farmer and a fake HOA. It's a mirror, reflecting a deeper truth. In the modern world, power wears many faces. Sometimes it doesn't come with guns, but with a clipboard, not from court orders, but from laminated flyers, not from soldiers, but from neighbors convinced that blind compliance is the only path to community safety. We live in an age where control is no longer crude or obvious. It doesn't command, it convinces. It doesn't force, it labels. And instead of chains, it uses social isolation to make dissenters feel like the problem. The greatest lesson from this story is this: if you don't know where your boundary is, someone else will draw it for you. Callahan isn't a hero because he's stronger, smarter, or wealthier. He became a leader because he dared to say no when everyone else stayed silent. He dared to ask questions while others kept their heads down. And when faced with a system designed to make him doubt himself, he chose to stand firm in truth. You don't have to live on a farm to understand this lesson. In your home, at your workplace, in your community, there are always Karens. They may not carry clipboards, but they know how to weaponize rules, policies, or social pressure to make you forget who you are. And when that happens, the only thing standing between you and the spiral of fear is your ability to stand for what's right, even if you're standing alone. If you've ever felt isolated for speaking the truth, if you've ever been targeted for not fitting in, remember, you are not alone. People like Callahan have walked this road before you. And people like you are the reason they never gave up. Freedom isn't just the right to live on your land. It's the right to hold on to yourself when everything around you tries to make you forget. If you've stayed with us this far, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to witness a story that isn't just about one man, but about awakening, about the fine line between freedom and control. If this story made you think, moved you, or even made you angry, please hit that like button, share this video to spread the message, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more true, powerful stories like this. We want to hear from you. What concerns you most? Who did you resonate with? What do you think we should do when the truth gets distorted? Leave a comment, positive or critical, because every voice contributes to a conversation that brings us closer to justice and closer to the truth.